Migrating to Australia, the podcast. Lockdown edition 4,000 million, trillion, billion and one. I'm Grant Williams. Um, I don't know what day it is. I don't know what month it is. I don't know if there's still a world outside
Does it
because
matter, Grant? Does it matter?
we're in we're still in lockdown. So COVID. It's all about COVID. I'm here to help Mr. David Bongiorno, Australia's most intrepid, and I'm not liking you on the narrow screen format, David. So you're 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 Australia's thinnest immigration lawyer,
I,
and
I wish I was. I wish I was.
we're going to talk today to Sarah, who is
A
put
lawyer,
uh,
and
um,
you go.
Novak Djokovic's cousin.
Yes.
No, I just threw that one in.
Absolutely, I'll take that claim.
How's this? Serbia to
Zimbabwe
Yes.
to New Zealand
to Australia.
to Australia.
She might have a favourite US uncle in filmmaker Peter Bogdanovich. Actually, that's a different spelling, isn't it?
He's altered it slightly, and there's also Bogdan Bogdanovic, the basketball player that was.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll take him as well. He's also a cousin. Sentiments.
And you're practicing law on the beautiful Gold Coast. So
Brisbane.
how?
Brisbane
Oh, you're
now,
in Brisbane.
sorry.
You're in Brisbane now. Fantastic.
Yeah, I've been in Brisbane for a year now.
And what area of law are you practicing in?
Commercial litigation.
That you've come to commercial litigation from
Yes.
Belgrade,
Yes.
Belgrade to Harare to Auckland or Wellington.
Neither. So, and not Harare either. So, when we moved, we went for Zimbabwe and New Zealand. We were very rural. If only I had an interactive little map to show you how teeny tiny, particularly where we lived in Zimbabwe was. And then the same in New Zealand. We were about an hour and a half north of Wellington in a very small town called Levin.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
I have to ask the question, Sarah, because
Yes.
we have to nail down the immigration. All right.
Yes.
Why from Serbia and
Yes.
without going into geopolitics, that was a
Sure.
pretty troubled part of the world for
Sure.
a while. So
Yes. I don't mind, too much to jump. I mean, my story, I couldn't possibly tell it without the geopolitics, because without the geopolitics, I guess the story would never have.
So you were a baby during the war.
Yes. So when I was born, it was former Yugoslavia. It was Yugoslavia. Well, it was just Yugoslavia at the time. And yeah, look, it was all happening, and my parents were, originally from a smaller town in Serbia. They'd sort of moved up to Belgrade looking for work and finished uni there. And I think, if you speak to a lot of ex-Yugo communities now, and it's definitely something I've noticed now as, an adult, and the more I've grown up and spoken to people's different stories coming to Australia particularly, there's a common sentiment that, like, my parents' generation didn't really feel, regardless of where they were in the country, now in the different states, or the different countries now, I guess, pardon. There was a strong sentiment that the war wasn't going to happen. And even if it was certainly not going to metastasize into what it unfortunately did unfold. And so a lot of people held off on moving anywhere. And, it eventually got to that point where my parents just went, no, this is happening, and we're stuck, and, our kid's not going to have a future. And which is, again, a very common sentiment held by everyone. Everything was being lost. My father couldn't find work. He has a master's in agricultural engineering. My mum is a doctor. And they couldn't work. My mum had a job, but it was, with inflation, wartime, everything was a huge struggle. And they just said, all right, we've got to get out of here. But by the time they sort of went, okay, and they were the only ones in my family who decided to leave. And by the time they'd sort of brought this decision, it was sort of too late to move to any of the Western nations. So Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand had sort of just pulled the handbrake on asylum seekers and refugees coming. And they said they couldn't take any more. And that's when good old Mugabe actually, and funnily enough, Mandela at that time. So Mandela had, I think, around that time sort of just come into power, but South Africa was still in a quite not as stable state as Zimbabwe. And I think when we talk about Zimbabwe now, a lot of people obviously relate to the most recent issues that happened prior to Mugabe's death, because he's late now. And, that's sort of the memory that they hold, forgetting that Zimbabwe at one point was the richest country in Africa. It had highest exports for a lot of produce and all sorts of things, big diamond mines. There was stability. And Mugabe was actually very good friends with our late president, Tito. And he had actually attended Tito's funeral in 1980, whenever that was. Pardon, I can't remember the exact year, but it might be 1980. But yeah, so they were very good friends. And why? Because when Mugabe actually decided to liberate Rhodesia into Zimbabwe, into modern-day Zimbabwe, Tito had actually sent over military assistance. There was a sympathy towards the liberation, I guess, the fight for the liberation. And Mugabe had held a very strong sentiment towards Yugoslavians. And so he had said, whoever wants to move to Zimbabwe to leave the war were very welcome to come in. And from my memory, I don't even think we needed visas. It was sort of like just come in. There was probably some thought going, I doubt a whole bunch of white Yugoslavians are going to come move to Southern Africa. It wasn't going to be a massive exodus of people coming to Zimbabwe. But, my parents just went, literally, this is, now as an adult, and now that, I'm about the age that my parents were when this all happened, and I think about it, they didn't have Google and internet or anything, TripAdvisor to be like, where are we moving? What are the reviews of this place? It was just this sounds better than what we have here. And they took a huge leap of faith and decided to move to Zimbabwe. There wasn't any prospects of, it wasn't like my mom or my father had a job lined up or anything like that. It was just, let's go. And I think the older that I get, the wilder that suddenly seems.
But Tara, I would have thought that with an Ag Sci background, that it was your dad with Ag Sci, wasn't it? Would have been really in demand in Zimbabwe, and could have immediately turned his skills into a fulfilling career, I would have thought there.
Yes, but ironically, what happened was it was mum. So ultimately as well. So when they moved, my mum spoke conversational English, and my dad didn't speak any English at all, like zero.
Not a lot of Serbian being spoken in the farmlands in Zimbabwe.
No, not at all. And so we obviously landed to Harare, and we were there for probably 6 months, 8 months, something like that. And you know how life can throw you some very bizarre, beautiful coincidences. And we are eternally grateful and still in contact with a lot of the families that we met in those first few months in Zimbabwe, because really without them, I really wouldn't be here today. Where I am. And, like I said, the older you become, the more and more appreciative of your roots and your story do you sort of become, because you start realizing how different it is, and you treasure the difference rather than sort of shy away from it. And then, so my mum was able to find a job in a hospital that was about 600 kilometers south of Harare. It's closer to the border with South Africa. So a lot of my school holidays and things was spent going to South Africa. Also, South Africa was a little bit cheaper, and it had sort of more to do than Zimbabwe in some sense. But I definitely
mum's medical degree.
Yes.
Was that recognized? I mean, you said she took a job in a hospital. Was she able to do equivalency exams to practice medicine?
No, they didn't ask for what we'd have, what the loops that she's had to jump through in New Zealand and then subsequently now in Australia. she didn't. I mean, she's had to do an English test coming to Australia now, which honestly I find so frustrating. She's practiced only in English for 30 years. And I know, like, and you know, David, I did practice migration myself for my first sort of year of out of law school. And I find that a little draconian, really, and unnecessary. Awful. You know, if you can say you've practiced in English speaking countries, why would you suddenly need to demonstrate in a test that you can speak English? It seems a little like unnecessary. But look, where we moved, they were desperate for doctors, and my mum was the only female doctor and only female white doctor in a huge land like area where we lived. To sort of paint a picture, it was where we were, it was a huge sugarcane area that really like built up well. So they built a mill and then a tiny township and two primary schools. And that was all we had for like a good 300-kilometer radius around us. And, you know, I literally lived an episode of National Geographic on any good day. Was like an average day for me as a kid.
At this stage, sorry, you spoke Serbo-Croatian. Were you fluent in English at this stage, or did you pick up your English in Zimbabwe?
Yep. So I picked up my English in Zimbabwe. I was 3.5 when we moved to Zimbabwe. And obviously, so as a 3.5-year-old, I just started speaking Serbian. So when I say that I'm bilingual, I really mean it, because I really learned both languages on par developmentally at the same time. And they, you know, my parents, the way they did it was, look, at school, you speak English, at home with Serbian at all times. And they, you know, my mum says there was a stage where I sort of refused to respond back in Serbo-Croat, but they didn't sort of punish me or, you know, negate or like, you know, anything negative towards that. They just insisted in maintaining speaking Serbian to me with the hope that I would just get over it. And then I did. And then I just kept in the end, I just started responding back after a while again in Serbian, because those 9 and a bit years in Zimbabwe, we didn't go back to Serbia at all, or what we consider modern day Serbia, and obviously the fall apart, because at first it was because of the unrest that was still going on in the Balkans. We couldn't go back, you know, for those reasons. And then ultimately what unfortunately started unfolding in Zimbabwe. And, you know, my parents this time went, we're not waiting like we did last time to get out of here. All the telltale signs, the way that this is going is now becoming, you know, prominent. Let's figure out how to get out of here. And mum started looking for work, and I believe she had a couple of offers in Australia, because having doctors work out in the bush and rural areas in Australia is very desirable. But she said, look, after living where we had for, you know, almost 10 years, she was like, I need a little bit more of civilization. I didn't want to go. And also the paperwork for New Zealand, as it usually does, I think it still is this way, paperwork for New Zealand tends to come through a lot faster, and they just wanted to get out. And then it was just sweet. So that all just sort of lined up, and that's, you know, how it all ended up moving there. And then, yeah, we flew into Wellington. And then mum got a job in this, well, she'd organized to have a job in this smaller town. And so we sort of moved up that way.
When mum was practicing medicine in New Zealand,
yes,
she's a fluent speaker of English. How's Dad's English? Has that developed, and did he get to work as an agricultural engineer?
He unfortunately didn't get a chance to work as an agricultural engineer, but he's absolutely fine now. He still has, and I think this is very sweet, this little book that he had when we first moved to Zimbabwe, that he just went around and would like point to things and ask people, like tree, essentially, I guess, for like lack of better things. And he would write it out, tree. And because, you know, we in Serbia use the Cyrillic alphabet. And the Cyrillic alphabet is phonetic. So each sound you make has one letter. So, you know, in English, we say the is TH, but we would have just like the equivalent of the, like, or a better example would be sh. We say SH. We actually just have a letter for the sh sound. So people would tell him, and he would use the Cyrillic alphabet so he could sound it out. And then just got through it eventually. And after a few years was able to, like, you know, overcame it, and then it came into practice. But it was actually difficult for him to find work, even though we lived, you're absolutely right, in an area where he should have been able to thrive. But the jobs weren't as available to him. due to you could say nepotism a little bit, and I guess they were swept up by English farmers or people more in those roles that had been beforehand. So that it was it's my mother's and mine experience in Zimbabwe probably contrasts my father's a lot over the years. And you as a kid, I definitely couldn't see it as well as I do see it now, looking back at how isolating that life could have been as well for him, sort of being stuck at home while this was all going on, because mum had to work and because it's the only general hospital really, and as well in this tiny area that covers thousands and thousands and thousands of people that come from many, many kilometers away. So you're on call all the time. And then obviously I was just one of those active kids that was always doing something with sports and school and and I think that probably gave him enough to keep busy for a while. So I had the nuclear family flipped. The breadwinner was the lady, and then the stay-at-home dad, which was it's different and good in its own ways.
You mentioned in Zimbabwe that your family acquired friends who've taught you lessons that are valuable even to today, and you're forever grateful for them. What were some of those lessons, and how did they serve you in New Zealand first and then in Australia?
In New Zealand, they were challenged, those lessons. And we had a very rough time moving to New Zealand, and I guess we can I'll jump into that in a moment. Look, one of the things that I will say now is it really doesn't matter where you were born, color of skin, race, creed, whatever you feel, gender, whatever you feel divides us, actually really unites us, because ultimately people are either good or bad. It doesn't matter where you sort of come from. And if you come to people with an open heart, with wanting to help, with pure generosity and genuineness, it will really take you far in life. And that's what we experienced when we got there. My parents met, they were walking somewhere with me in the first couple of months, trying to figure out how to get from where we were staying in Harare to sort of into the city center. And as you can imagine, and my mum, by the way, in the end could speak Shona. She still has very basic conversational Shona, and a bit of Ndebele, which is the other language that's spoken in Zimbabwe. And there was some gentleman who drove past, and they essentially said, "What are you doing?" And my dad couldn't speak anything, and my mum barely, with hand signals and the whole, you're Italian, how we talk anyway, with comes naturally. And he sort of said, "Oh, get in the car, I'll sort of show you around." And this man ended up showing my parents and myself, but obviously I was a kid, I have no idea, but all of Harare. Said that he asked my mom, what are they doing? Mom said she was a doctor, and through talking about it, was like, I might be able to hook you up with someone, like a complete stranger on the street that you'd never seen. This man went out of his entire way to help this young lost family who just escaped war. And I don't even know, who knows if he even knew what was going on in former Yugoslavia at the time. To the extent that it was. And particularly, as you said, how many Serbs did you actually think, or ex-Yugos full stop, were actually in Zimbabwe at the time? There was an embassy there that changed names more times than I could remember. I didn't even know where I was from by the time we left Zimbabwe, to be honest. But yeah, no, I remember then he sort of saw where my parents were living, and it was quite one of those stories, mattress on the bed, very bare minimum of everything, with the last couple of $100 they had in their pocket. And he sort of went, I know a man that might be able to help you. And he took my parents and me to this Greek gentleman who had a material store, like sort of like a small Spotlight where it's just sort of material, I guess. I don't think you can really get those in Australia, or at least I haven't seen them anywhere. But yeah, he had this store. Yeah. And he sort of went, and Greeks and Serbs particularly do have a history of this brotherhood idea. And when he found out my parents, like we were this young Serbian family trying to make our way through, he really adopted us in his family, that they sort of came over to our house and donated, and beds and a cot for me, pots, pans, plates, really, took control for my parents. They were probably, so my parents were early 30s. I think my cupsis was maybe 10 years older, somewhere there, like a little bit older, not too much significantly, but really decided to adopt us in and then introduced us to the Greek community. And then the rest was history. And we still have really strong ties with them, never remained in Zimbabwe. Both those families, and we still maintain contact with them, which is wild, I think, to think there was time, obviously, before social media, WhatsApp, and the rest of these beautiful parts of technology that we have now, that we all lost contact. And then since we've got all of these ways that we can communicate now, all those avenues have been touched up again, and years of, have been caught up over time. So, yeah.
So you said some of those lessons were not helpful in New Zealand. How was being adopted made to feel a member of the community that is, albeit the Greek Zimbabwean community?
Yeah.
How did that not translate to New Zealand?
Because I think we were all a little bit naive. Look, when we moved to to New Zealand after that, because we were so lucky with the way our lives had sort of played out in those years in Zimbabwe, that I guess all of us held on to a very positive outlook of migrating. It's going to be challenging, of course. You're going to have hurdles to overcome, but you're going to meet people, and it's going to be fine, and you'll build a community again, and you'll start your lives afresh. And where we moved to New Zealand, we all had a cultural shock. That was life, and expectations got flipped to about 180. Don't get me wrong, I have a lot of good friends that I still stay in touch with from New Zealand, but those first few years there were very confronting on a lot of ways. New Zealand does have an issue of xenophobia, and we didn't move to a city. We moved to a small, essentially, town that surrounds a lot of farms and things like that. And there isn't, I think that we were the only white family that spoke a different language at home. And apart from maybe a couple of Chinese and Indian immigrant families, but everybody sort of stuck to themselves. It was, I wouldn't say segregated in the sense of when you think of like apartheid or something like that, but communities weren't really together. And we had a very hard time fitting into that sort of mentality. We weren't as welcomed as we were when we arrived to New Zealand, and that was very, very rough. Particularly, look, I was turning 13 the year we moved to New Zealand, which is a hard time for anybody. If you move towns as a 13-year-old, that can be quite challenging, I think, starting new schools, meeting new faces. When you move continents entirely and you have this entire cultural shift, it can be quite challenging. Look, and I think a slightly funny way to sort of summarize the cultural shock and why it was so different. Look, I went to an old British sort of styled colonial school. That was my primary school. It was the smartest and most athletic kid was the most popular. Education was something in Zimbabwe that's par none. And if there's any Zimbabweans out there who grew up there in the 90s, they all know what I mean. We were very, very lucky the way that our school system was run everywhere across the country. Education was just number one. You didn't think about anything else. Respect for your elders was a very close second. The way that you interact as a younger person with anyone older than yourself, there was a certain decorum that was followed. So, that was my foundation. And then my first day of high school in New Zealand, someone swore at the teacher, yelled the F word, and nothing happened. And I remember just sitting there going, what's going to happen? Are they, we had corporal punishment where I came from, and for far, far less things. And people like my peers in primary school would not dream of swearing at a teacher, raising your voice, let alone a cuss word, so to speak. And then suddenly, to be thrust into an environment where, the kids are yelling at your teachers like that. I just remember sitting there going, oh, life is very, very different. And I was an anomaly. I was this very odd little, kid in New Zealand. That part of New Zealand, as I said, wasn't exposed to a lot of immigrants. So they didn't understand how I could be white and from Africa. And they couldn't swallow Zimbabwe. I got very used to just saying by my time in end of New Zealand, yes, I'm from South Africa, because it just, I couldn't explain any further that South Africa was its own independent country south of the border. Yes, I actually, funnily enough, lived close to the border, but I'm not South African. But, and yes, I know what a television is. And no, I didn't ride lions to school. And no, I didn't live in a mud hut. And no, yes, some people do still live in, no, but we have houses. And, these like, and at first I was very, obviously as a 13-year-old, and there was no one to ask, like, is this happening to anybody else? Are these normal questions? Are people being genuinely curious, or are they being aggressive? And unfortunately, I think where I was, a lot of the time it was aggressive. And that was my sort of high school experience and having to deal with that. And look, those first 2 years were, I would comfortably say, traumatic. And I'm a big advocate for mental health now as an adult, and I've sort of learnt a lot of that stuff was packaged very deeply, and I'm fair enough, I'm a sensitive soul. I think anybody subjected to that at such a young age would struggle to make peace with it. But you do in the end, and you figure out and you go, okay, like this is why this was like this, and this is why this was like that. And you didn't have it, I think, people to go to New Zealand, and now, because it's been since we moved to New Zealand, I think 2003. It's a different place now than it was back then as well. Jacinda Ardern, often my mum and I say we wished we lived in New Zealand when Jacinda Ardern was the Prime Minister. She's definitely changed a lot of the culture, I think, with conversation.
Who did you have? Piggy Muldoon?
No, it was the was it? No, it was the
John Key.
John Key.
Yeah, I think
Helen
so.
Clark.
Helen Clark.
Then John Key. Yeah.
Yes.
Would have been the end of Helen Clark, and then all of John Key. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, and it was a big learning curve with how to sort of deal with people. I did harbor, I think, as any teenager finds, to harbor resentment with anything with life. I certainly held my resentment for those for quite a while regarding that experience. And even now with my mum, talking to her, she was challenged constantly on her intellect based on the fact that she had an accent when she spoke. Even though, she was a doctor, and people didn't trust her opinion because, they'd never had a doctor who had an accent. And we found going to stores, like when we went, there's a small town about half an hour from us that had more of like it was like a mini city, I guess, sort of feel. And, you go there to get more like clothes and things like that. And what we found was it was probably easiest if I spoke on behalf of my parents, because we weren't challenged as much again, and you'd get very wild questions, and people assumed we were Afghanistanis, and you think to yourself, oh yeah, like, and you think the way people ask you questions, you go, how do Middle Eastern immigrants in this country feel when people ask them these kind, you realize, and you're just like, this is insane. So, and then my parents stuck it out for a bit longer, but when I was about 17, as most 17-year-olds, I'm quite a hot-headed person. I was back then, at least. And I sort of had this unfortunate attitude of, well, if I can't beat them, I may as well just join them and start behaving like my peers. Maybe that will take the edge off the way I'm being treated by my peers at some point. And look, that backfired quite well. My parents just went, no, we need to get her out of this environment. This isn't helping her develop. And they decided to send me to Melbourne to finish my high school. And that was, again, I was a small country kid, and suddenly I was in this massive city. I was turning 18 that year. I didn't know anyone. Nobody knew me. I wouldn't see them.
Where did you go to school in Melbourne? Because we're here in Melbourne now.
Yeah, so I was in Eltham College for a year.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, so out that way. And I remember when I first got there, and I could catch a train from Eltham to the city, and it took about 45 minutes. And I remember just my mind being blown that I was in the same place. Like, this is still Melbourne. This is all Melbourne. This isn't different towns or different cities. This is mind-boggling for this little kid. And that was a huge other development. But yeah, since then it's sort of been I've just stuck to Australia. I've obviously fallen in love with the place enough.
Is there I mean, in New Zealand, it sounds certainly like you were suppressing, for want of a better term, your time in Zimbabwe. Did the Kiwis in your life in New Zealand ever get an idea of the backstory about Serbia? Did you even bother to explain your Serbian background?
Yes, but it fell on deaf ears. I was just one of those kids that unfortunately got very, very picked on, and I had swastikas spray painted on my locker for the first 2 years because they assumed as I was white and from Africa, I must be their equivalent of a racist. And I'm as whatever they've imagined in their heads, and so therefore and then how do I you say, did you try to explain where you'd come from, that you'd left war? How do you explain to them if they don't really understand that my people, like my family directly was involved in the Second World War fighting against the Nazis? Why are you spray painting a swastika on my so how do you have a dialogue when education wise, geography was, look, and it's a semi-criticism, but it's not a big one. It was a cultural shift. When I was in primary school in Zimbabwe, by the time I finished primary school, I not only knew all the countries in Africa, their capital cities, and essentially what their main, like the way that the economy ran, like what were they known for, sort of things. It was the whole world. You had to know Europe and America and South America, China, everywhere. That was, so you were always aware the different languages spoken, the capital cities, these things. And then I moved to New Zealand, and geography was going out to a dairy farm and learning how to, so that was like, to me, and I remember going for like a field trip to a dairy farm, and that was a huge deal. And for a kid that grew up in the bush, like, this was a very odd thing for me to sort of go, this is the geography. And I remember the teacher went, does anybody want to put their hand up the cow's butt and see that's how we do the insemination? And I thought, well, when in Rome, I may as well make this fun for myself.
David, at the risk of injecting a little bit of controversy,
yes.
And Sarah, do you have any sense of how Yugoslavia was viewed at that time? Because you mentioned
Phenomenal
you had
question.
the swastika because of
Yes.
the white racist connotation for Southern Africa.
Yes.
But at that time, Marshal Tito was not on the plus list like here. And I assume that a student or a geographically aware person in Southern Africa would be thinking, "Hey, okay, you fought the Nazis, but Tito's no Democrat."
No.
Serbia's
definitely not a Democrat.
and Serbia's no workers' paradise.
Oh,
so you
did I know? I guess the question ultimately was I aware? No. And you know what's funny? It was mostly I wasn't even aware of the negative, because of what happened in New Zealand. I guess I was blessed. You could call that maybe a blessing in disguise that they hadn't even heard of Serbia. Because could you imagine then, like, what would have gone on? But it was only when I moved to Australia did I actually did I become aware of how much how negatively people held Serbians, I guess, in mind since that war. And it's not that I wasn't aware of what happened. My parents certainly always taught me the history of things, and they were very much against it. They like my mother always instilled on me, just be good to everyone. Everyone's a brother and sister. Love everyone. Don't discriminate, because the moment you start doing that, that's why we don't live in the home that you were born in. So you don't do that. And then this is also like when you talk about it, this was a time before the internet. The internet really became a thing when I was like 15, but that was the dial-up tone, and if someone calls the house phone, there's no internet. So it was a different time. So I wasn't entirely aware. I started becoming much more aware and confronted with my ethnic background when I moved to Australia, and that's been its own journey.
How did that manifest itself? Your awareness. What were people saying when they learned you were of Serbian extraction?
Yeah, not good things. It's like you suddenly become. I felt that I was this ambassador, that I was this undeclared ambassador, that not all Serbians are crazy. We're not all war maniacs. We're not genocidal freaks. We're just normal people. And I think this sentiment inside of me probably died down a little bit in university to some degree, but I still sort of feel that burden that I need to be like, no, not all Serbs are like this. We're inclusive. We love everyone. We understand that this was horrible. We don't all agree what happened. A lot of us are glad that Mladic is going to, die in jail. Like this isn't a representation of all of us. But it's also, as we grew in this, media grew. It wasn't just the internet, but the power of media really started growing, didn't it, over the last 10, 15 years? And what that meant was the control of narratives. And you start seeing how powerful that can be and how that can impact people. So I had, I when I went through uni, I worked in hospitality for 10 years, and I off and on, and that put me through my university years. And I think, put it this way, I still don't know. And people go, oh, where are you from? Because I feel like if I say Serbia, am I really yes, ethnically, bloodline, both my parents' side, everybody's, I know my family tree, they're Serbian, but I haven't been back at this point. I haven't been back in 8 years.
Okay,
I didn't.
Let's sort that out. Where do you feel? Where do you feel like you're from?
I think, and that's the beauty of it. I think I'm a little bit of all of those places. The Serbian part of me fuels my passion. I do feel that. I have quite an emotive family, and I like my history. For a big part, it's not just the Yugoslav wars. There's so much rich history before that I really enjoy. One of the things that I really enjoy in my spare time is reading fantasy novels. I've always loved it that way, and learning about folklore from my country, from my roots. I really do think that they shine through. In Zimbabwe, I learned compassion and gratitude. In New Zealand, I learned to toughen up. And Australia has been the sort of the combination of all of those things, developing me into the person that I am now, and being confident with going, okay, well, you're not from all of these places, but you're from all of them at the same time. Because I think the only people that I've had similar experiences with 5 or 6 different countries by the time they're in their 20s, children of diplomats. But their journey is different to mine. I wasn't leaving because mum or dad got a great job in Dubai or something. We were getting out because of war, going, this isn't working. Next.
Sarah, can I ask you a question that I think many of our international listeners might be interested in the answer?
Absolutely.
Now, you've lived in New Zealand, having gone there as an outsider and then coming to Australia. How have you found New Zealand and Australia to be similar, and how are they different?
I think the similarity and difference, funnily enough, is almost the same thing. I love Australia a lot, but I do think there's still a lot to work on regarding the immigrant experience here. There's a lot of work. We say that we're a melting pot. I honestly, as an immigrant, don't agree with that statement. I do think that we're still too segregated culturally to call ourselves an entire melting pot. People aren't as welcoming. And I think immigrants struggle to talk about the narrative because we're scared that we're going to come across ungrateful. But that's not the case at all. We're very grateful. We love living here. But we still have some issues and we're too scared to speak up about them. So in New Zealand, that feeling is far more at the forefront of your daily existence all the time. Whereas at least in Australia, I I found a lot of people who had somewhat similar stories to mine, that at least I could go, oh, okay, like you get what I mean when I say X, Y, Z, when we talk about, we're Australian, even though I guess I'm technically not, but I've lived here the longest, 14 years. I'd like to consider myself Australian. This is the longest place I've ever lived. But New Zealand is more open to the migrant experience. I think that if I had lived in Auckland or Wellington, and I should preface by saying that if I'd lived in one of the cities, I do think my experience would have been a lot different. It's because I lived rurally and I'm living in areas where there isn't much exposure to diversity, I guess is the best way to put it. But it's easier to migrate to New Zealand by the papers and to get a New Zealand passport eventually, that it is much easier that way. And look, I'm sure, David, a lot of people who did that would rather jump to New Zealand, do the 3-4 years there, get their citizenship passport, and then boom, they're just automatically coming to Australia anyway.
Absolutely. It is easier in a way. I agree.
Yeah, so it's a bit simpler to do it, and a lot of people have followed. And and it's interesting for me to I've had a lot of people that I've met, like people who were born in China and then couldn't get into Australia, so they went to and that means we already have something in common. We understand this sort of deal, but I'm so grateful that New Zealand and Australia have such a good relationship that way, that I could, I am technically, I am a resident by all means, because I don't need a visa in the formal sense of applying for a visa to come and work and live in Australia freely.
That's because explain, Sarah, to people listening overseas. You have a 444 special category visa, which is in existence, and if you fly to New Zealand, it ceases. When you return to Australia, it's activated again. So explain to listeners the rights you enjoy as a special category visa holder.
Well, the rights are amazing. Well, I can live in Australia as long as I want. I'm open to all avenues of work, education. I have Medicare, which is amazing to have. I pay taxes like everyone else. I'm afforded the same rights. Things have recently changed as well regarding to education that I think I didn't qualify for initially for tertiary education, but they've changed that now as well. My understanding, but David, correct me if I'm wrong, I do think that as New Zealand citizens can now apply for HICS, or they couldn't before, or something along the lines. And I don't know if they still can. I think something's changed in that sort of capacity. So essentially, you're a citizen for all intents and purposes, apart from and get fined if you don't vote. Which is
and not that you ever would become, but you can't become a government solicitor. Not that you ever would. Now, is that? I mean, your experience is rich, and it's lasted many, many years in many different continents. Is that what prompted you to move into immigration law, to make it better for those who come after you?
Yes. And it was also sort of just kind of fell from the sky sort of moment. And I just went, maybe it's supposed to be. I think, my parents only moved over from New Zealand in 2014 from memory, 2014 or 15. So I'd already been here, and I was about halfway through my degree at that point. It was very challenging to find work and being able to jump into places, as well as because I guess not a lot of places understand that as a New Zealand citizen, you don't have, yes, you're an immigrant, but you're not held back you're not held back by any other sort of barriers, I guess, that the visas can put up for you. But there's always ways around that. And I had just been admitted as a solicitor the week before, and it was coming into the New Year's Christmas break, and I was working at the same restaurant I had been for about a year and a bit. And I was just talking to a customer, and he sort of made some sort of comment. He went, "Oh, do you do anything else, or is this sort of the career?" And I went, "Oh, funnily enough, I'm actually a lawyer. I was just admitted last week while I was pouring him a beer going, I'm figuring it out." And he went, I might know someone who's looking for a junior. And I went, great. And he goes, would you do migration? And I'm like, honestly, I think that would work. And then we start, he got my story a little bit and went, I actually think you'd be a perfect fit for this. And it's true. I do. If anyone understands the immigrant experience, it's certainly me, from culturally to the legal side of it, really, and the paperwork that goes into it. that it wasn't easy moving from Zimbabwe to New Zealand as well. There's a lot of health and medicals that you have to do. I guess you're flagged the moment you're coming from Africa. So it is hard. And, as well as having even my mum coming to Australia, like I said, touched on it before, she had to do an English test again, all of her paperwork, because, she had finished a degree in former Yugoslavia, in a country that doesn't exist anymore. And I could honestly make you laugh with a lot of stories getting caught in airports that hadn't updated their systems with that country doesn't exist anymore. Where are you going? But, and these hurdles that sort of happen, and having to get them translated, make sure it's a professional translator and it's government approved, and get this done and prove this, and that you've worked here, and get the pay slips. And that was the blessing, was that at least my mum recently had worked in New Zealand for 10 years before they'd come over here. So at least she had enough of a New Zealand sort of background to go, worked in a Western nation. I'm still jumping through the loops, but at least it's a little bit easier to sort of process. But again, when it came to looking at her work experience, or her work time in Zimbabwe, and then her degree being from Yugoslavia, that was again a bit of a hurdle to jump through, to the point that they do wonder, do you have to do some courses, do you have to do all sorts?
You're admitted to the Supreme Court of Queensland.
Yes I am.
And people come and study law here and endeavour to use it as a vehicle for migration and to practice here as well.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain your journey? I mean, my journey was a long time ago. I had to apply to 200 law firms when I did my articles, and 190 said, "Go away, David, go way away." 10 said, "Have an interview," and 2 said, "Have a second round," and I've been working as a lawyer since. It's a lot harder now, isn't it? It's even harder. I mean, there's no articles in Queensland anymore.
Nope, we don't have articles. We just have the practical legal training course. So once you finish your bachelor's, you enroll to do your practical legal training, which includes going through, your 75 days of sort of work for a firm. It sort of gets ticked off that you can do X, Y, Z. You do a whole bunch of assessments from, corporate to family law. It's a little bit of everything. It's sort of just getting you ready to learn to apply the law that you've done, because a lot of people don't realize the law degree doesn't equate to lawyer, because you've just learnt the theory and you've just kind of figure out the issue, rule, application, conclusion sort of stuff, right? But you're not really applying that to real life situations. So how do you translate that into application? And that's where you do that in practical legal training. And then once you have that and you've jumped through all the loops and you get admitted, that's the move forward. But I was the same. I recently saw my old folder with pre-admission, post-admission resumes and cover letters, and and this is, you were sort of touching back to what you said, Grant, with things that you've learned. People were advising me, my surname's Bogdanovic, and people were advising me, but don't put Bogdanovic, just put Sarah B. And if they call you Sarah, just take it. Don't correct them. They don't want to be corrected about your name. And I'm like, but it's my name. Why are people telling me that I should pronounce it's Sarah? It's not even that difficult. But
I just realized that all the people I know called surname Bogdan are all Bogdanoviches, aren't they?
Probably. Well,
that could be Polish too.
Polish, Belarus, all of the Eastern Bloc, Romania, going that way. It could could signify. But funny you say, I had a taxi driver whose surname was Bogdanovic recently, or was it Bogdan? It was Bogdan. That's right. It was 100% Bogdan, because I got in the car and started laughing. Went, "Hey, my long lost cousin! I haven't seen you in a while." And then, would you believe that this gentleman was from Poland? He was an immigrant from Poland. And he goes, "My ancestry is Serbian. 200 years ago, we were from Belgrade and modern day Belgrade. And that we've, moved over to Poland because of whatever." And he got into this massive chat. And I was just like, this is insane. We very well could be on that note, then long distant cousins, twice removed somewhere down the line.
Now, the legal profession...
sorry, David. I've only got one more question for Sarah before you go talking legal stuff. I want to go back to New Zealand for a bit. Now, Fred Dagg's going to be before your New Zealand experience, but you're in rural New Zealand. But did you
Yes.
know about all the cool New Zealand music, like the Bats and Straight Jacket Fits and the Chills?
No, I'm so sorry I didn't. But Fat Drop is my favorite New Zealand band, so I went down. If you've ever heard them, down that route. So I think more the reggae. I think I definitely fashioned myself, and probably still do. I think if my friends, when they eventually listen to this, they go, "You used to fashion yourself as a hippie," I'd be like, "You still are," at heart. So because I was definitely someone who like I was met with a bit of animosity, I guess, and a resistance, but I wanted to follow love, what Bob Marley was saying, open your heart, go that way.
And
Sort of.
cricket.
No, look, I tried. I
You
tried. I tried cricket. I tried rugby. I tried AFL. I was a swimmer. This is not this is not my route.
You're practicing. How long have you been practicing for now?
I think it's been almost 3 years. Yeah.
Now, to get a foot in the door, because a lot of people who listen to the program come to study in Australia.
Yes.
And can you let us know, how many applications did you make after your practical legal training?
200 sounds shy of 200.
And it's not easy. It's not easy, is it?
Look, I actually look, David, I guess for listeners, how I got across to David was LinkedIn. That is a powerful tool. My current role that I've been at now for the past year and a bit, well, it's a year, it would have been a year in July, so we're going down that way, was all through LinkedIn. I was very, very active on it. And that was how I met connections. I was always polite. I reached out. I wasn't pushy with people. I just made it out that like, I'm available for a role if someone sees one. This is what I talk about. This is how I think. This is how I view this is what I can offer, really. And quite recently, I actually, there was a young student from, I think she came and did a bit at Bond, or she finished her degree. I never met her at the university, much younger than myself. And she sort of reached out as a connection and sent a nice message. And she really reminded me of myself. And I said to her, I can't unfortunately help you in this very second. I'm going to ask everyone who can get you a job, whether they can get you a job. She recently moved back to Victoria. And I've actually maintained a connection with her as friends. And I talked to her. I've said to her, if you have any questions career-wise, anything that I can possibly be of assistance with, I will do that. And I encourage anyone who's listening, if you find me on LinkedIn, if you're a junior and you just want to vent it about how frustrating this all is, please reach out. I'm very happy to lend an ear, because I do understand how isolating that experience can be, because you start going, am I worth it? Like, am I going to make it? Did I just waste my life? My journey through law as well, it wasn't just like a 4-year course. It took me 8 years to finish, because I couldn't get fee help or HECS in Australia. So my mum and I worked. My mum was working in New Zealand. I was working here, and we would, I would do 1 or 2 exams, working full-time hospitality to be able to pay rent and living and blah, blah, blah here. And then when I've got the time to do an exam, there was a year and a bit where I didn't study at all. And the whole time was just sort of keeping my head above water with paying bills and sort of surviving and getting by, and that aspect. So my grades didn't really reflect, I guess, how well I could do, because you'd be exhausted. I wish I was one of those people, who work full time and get the HDs, and I just take my hat off to those people, but you just got to keep going. I considered quitting more times than I care to admit, but I was just like, well, you're halfway now. You just may as well at least finish it and see what happens.
But grades, as you progress through the legal profession, grades become immaterial, don't they, really?
Well, I think so. I think once you start, proving your worth in a work environment that reflects more of your standing than it does. And, it was through LinkedIn that my current boss, I suppose if he hits this, I'd lost my previous job when I was working, the last migration job I was working through COVID, when it was the sort of first hit. I was the last in the office, so first out. And I really loved working there. I was very heartbroken. I was really looking forward to the career. And so quite beside myself, as everybody in COVID obviously felt during this time. And I was sitting out with a girlfriend of mine out on Burleigh Hill, closest friend for a very long time. We're having a coffee about a week after my 31st birthday. And I got this message on LinkedIn from my current boss, and he said something like, I saw that he viewed my profile. That was it. And I went immediately, saw that he was a partner at a firm, and then just sent a connection request and said, hi, I'm so-and-so. If you have anything, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. And he instantly replied and was like, look, we are looking for a junior, but I see that you're on the Gold Coast. So, good luck with the hunt. And I went, I can come to Brisbane. It's an hour drive. When do you want me there? And, essentially was 2 days later was going up for an interview. There was a Monday that he contacted me. Wednesday, I went up for the interview, and Monday I started. So use the tools as well as you can. I think the guest that you had last week sort of talked about talking about using these new tools as best as you can and figuring out what works, what kind of image are you projecting, and what's working, what's not, and have honest look with that kind of thing. We have more, yes, it's harder to get, I think, it's challenging. As you said, for yourself, you had a hard time getting your foot in the door. Out of the 200 applications, you've only got 3, 2, and then 1, boom, you've got the job. It is a little, the market's always saturated. I've read interesting articles where lawyers have talked about it. 100 years ago, people were complaining that law is saturated. There's too many lawyers. There's too many law grads. What are we going to do with them? But it's just move with the punches, move with the times, use what we have. When you were graduating, LinkedIn wasn't even in anybody's imagination as a means to do it. And look, when I was looking for jobs, even out of admission, I did everything. I did LinkedIn. I did print it off. I walked into places. I emailed places. I was on Seek, and I was talking to recruiters. So don't think this isn't the avenue for me. Just keep pushing. If you see yourself in the role and you really want it, it will come. It's just breathe. And then when I got this job here, I have to admit I had imposter syndrome for the first 2 months. I kept sitting there going, someone's going to fire me. Someone's just going to and go punked. It's all over. And thankfully I've settled well into the role now and still keep an eye out on that door, but no.
David, you mentioned that your grades become less important the further along you go.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you agree with this. I am far more impressed by someone who has had to battle it out to complete a degree.
Absolutely.
Had to do work, had to put it on hold, had to, really
doing it in a second language, doing it in a second language as well.
Yes.
Yep, that's an unbelievable commitment. But you were also sounding a precautionary note, David, about how hard it is to get a placement in law. Now, regular listeners will know that I did accounting. I recently touched base with one of my international student friends who had spent a lot of money to do the accounting course. Guess what they're doing now, David?
I hope they're doing accounting.
They're running a restaurant. They're running a restaurant. And so, precautionary tales. Pick the course. If it's what you love and it's what you desperately want to do, follow the course that is your passion. But if it's a vehicle for migration,
you've got to look, and I think pick something that you like doing. Look, one of the things that I also struggled with, looking back now with my mum, because she was a doctor, there was definitely a strong ethnic mother type, like, you will be a doctor. People would ask me when I was a kid, what are you going to be? And I'm going to be a whale trainer. And she's like, no, she's not. And she's going to be a doctor. She doesn't know. Like, don't ask her, ask me. And and I was pushed towards medicine. And I actually did the UMAT and got in when I was 17. And they said, we've got a spot for you. And I just went, I don't see myself as a doctor. I could do it. I had the grades. I had the capacity to sit down and study and learn this. But there was no drive. There was no passion to do that. But then, when you're in that weird age, I didn't stop to go, okay, but what am I good at? What do I like doing? That's the benefit of hindsight, because what was I always good at is gifted the gab if no one's noticed. And reading and writing is always, I have a traveling library with me. My new housemates, I'm just leaving this place now. My new housemates have already seen the library set up. That was the most important thing moving in. And I obviously really enjoy writing as well. And English has always been a thing. So it's funny. Sometimes you've just got to sit down and go, okay, what am I good at? And what is that going to translate into? If you'd said to me I was going to end up in the corporate sector of law, though, I would have just laughed hysterically in your face and been like, no, I'm definitely the new human rights lawyer of the world. This is definitely the way it's going. And
what attracts you? I mean, you are in the corporate sector and
yes.
living the dream. What do you like? A lot of people just say mindlessly, "Oh, I want to go into corporate. I want to go into litigation," and that's because their fathers or mothers or grandparents have done it, and everyone said you do it, and you don't do human rights because there's no pay in it. What do you like about the corporate litigation world?
Oh, look, I love a good challenge. I've always loved puzzles, and I think commercial litigation is sort of like a big game of chess almost, so you learn the rules. I'm still learning them because I'm a junior, so that's what I'm seeing. The way I'm looking at it now is that I'm learning the rules, so I know where my bishop and my knights need to go, and I need to play them in the way that it's coming back. And I think I had a far more cynical view of what commercial or corporate law was. And I've actually, it's one of those things that I've been humbled by learning the positive things that corporate law actually can do for people, for businesses. And I think that's going to become more and more relevant now in the forefront with the issues with small businesses and what we're facing with all the restrictions of COVID.
Give us some examples. Give us some examples, because that's a great point.
Yeah. Examples of
how corporate law can help us.
This one's, I'm trying to think of ways of like matters that I've working on, without giving, I guess, away the details of the matters. And I think it's helping the mum and dad businesses that really are the backbone of Australia. I think that's a lot like what we forget. Australia is built on a lot of mum and dads coming together, building these little, corporate entities that we're not talking like the towers that are McDonald's or Nike and things, right? But they've built enough that they're having a significant amount of their lives challenged when you do have big corporate entities coming after them. So insurance companies. And I think this is going to be something that's becoming more and more prevalent. And because, a mum and dad company that's been challenged by the leviathan of a giant corporation like an insurance usually is just going to bow out, aren't they? And just go, this is too hard, too expensive. Our resources to challenge this are nowhere in comparison to the resources that these other big corporations have. And I think that's where having commercial litigation lawyers who are passionate about helping the little guys and the big, building them back up into this is where it's like the crux of moving forward, and where it's going to be very much important, I think, coming into the future now.
I've thrown
I hope you can't hear my neighbours doing some DIY on a Saturday.
It's a Saturday afternoon. They can do as they wish. No, if we put the crystal ball on the table, will we see you at the bar in 5 years, 6 years time?
Oh, I don't know, David. I don't know. Look, all I've learned so far in my life is stop thinking that you have any control. Like, you have a passion and you have a drive. That's all you can really look at. Because like I said, if you had told me at any point in those 8 years of my schooling, practical legal training, that I would have ended up in this role that I am and absolutely loving it, like being like, this is amazing, I would have just been like, no, that's not me. That isn't, whereas I've now been given this opportunity. I've grown so much and I can't wait to see where that's going to take me, this trajectory. And it's like everything that's happened to me in life, none of it has been really like because I wanted to do this or I wanted to move this way, or it's been out of a sort of a necessity. Something happens and it's inspired a certain movement in me to go in a certain way. So we'll see. I think another one is, like a lot of people go, are you going to stay in Australia forever? And I don't know. I honestly didn't think I was going to be in Australia this long to start with. I just thought I was going to do, and funnily enough, look, I finished my last year. I applied for a working holiday visa in the UK. I saw myself as a solicitor over there. I came to Brisbane from the Gold Coast, had all my little application ready, gave it to the consulate. It was a very eerie time because COVID wasn't what it was yet. So this was like, we'll call it somewhere February last year. And people were talking about it. Was it like 2019, right? Oh,
2020 March.
Time. Well, just before the world went nuts with everything shutting down. It was right on the precipice. It was kind of on the news, but it was like, oh, it is just a thing and it'll go away. And it's like SARS or whatever it was. And everyone's like, oh, it'll be fine. And I handed my passport in, got in the car, drove back to the Gold Coast. The next morning, the whole world just went, borders are shut everywhere. And I just went, oh, no, I don't have a passport. And as someone who's lived from Serbia and Zimbabwe, I'm like, oh dear, this isn't good.
I think you'd be fabulous on your feet at the bar, and I wouldn't be surprised in 5-6 years' time if you were. My final question.
Yes.
Što radiš?
Šta radim?
Što radiš? Ništa.
Ništa ne radim.
Ništa. It's my only bit of Serbian, Grant. It's, I think, probably as hard as Russian to learn, if not more.
I started learning Russian, and funnily enough, one of the reasons I've sort of struggled, I'm looking at picking it up again. I actually can get very basic Russian out and sentence-wise because it is very similar. The thing is, though, the similarity is what stuffs me up because I start thinking in Russian and then I finish the sentence in Serbian, and I'm sure my Russian tutor who I've been meaning to get back in contact if she hears this podcast will be like, Sarah, we were doing so well.
Sarah, you've been champion. Grant and I could talk to you for hours. Thank you for coming on to the program.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for even considering me for this. It's been an awesome experience.
How could we not after your bio? It's a great story, and I'm glad you've told it. Thanks for sharing.
Oh, thank you for giving me a platform to share.
And Sarah, I'm really looking forward to you turning the corporate lawyer into the crusading good guy. That's going to be.
Oh, that is suddenly I felt this pressure on my.
I've never seen that caricature. Oh, the corporate lawyer fighting for the little guy.
Oh, could you imagine? Okay, well, look, challenge accepted. I hope I don't let you down, Grant.
Be great. Sarah, do you want to let people follow you on a social or something, or do you want to stay incognito?
Oh, look, like I said, and I stand by what I mentioned before for my LinkedIn. If there's juniors out there and people, like, it doesn't even have to be juniors. It could be at any point in your life. If you are struggling with careers and you've hit a blank, sort of a blank wall and you don't know, do I give up? Do I try something else? And you just want to talk to somebody who's had that similar experience, please reach out, particularly if you've got that immigrant experience that I've had that sort of struggles with, and if you've had people tell you comments like, don't put your full surname in and all sorts of that, like you wanted somebody who understands, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help in any way that I can. I'll put you in touch with recruiters or whoever it is that I can at the moment that is able to help. I'll do it. And regardless of where you are in the world. And if you want to talk to somebody about what it's like moving to Australia and sort of doing this, absolutely. My door's open, or my portal on LinkedIn is opened, I guess, to that.
Sarah, the mentor.
Sarah, absolute champion.
That was an ear to listen to. I don't know if mentor would be.
Absolute, just a joyous podcast, and one that will be out next week to share with mum and dad, and let us know what mum thinks.
I will definitely. I will let you know what they both think. I think they're both very excited to hear how that goes as well, how this goes.
Thanks for stopping by. Ciao.
Thank you, guys.
David Bongiorno. David Bongiorno on Twitter
at David Bongiorno, DAVIDBONGIORNO, the fastest way to get in touch. Are you on Twitter? Are you on Twitter, Sarah?
No. I think I did create a handle a while ago, but I didn't actually ever
You never took to Twitter. Never took
No,
to Twitter.
It's too much yelling. Wait, people are yelling a lot, and I'm a loud person as it is. That's enough yelling.
And on Instagram, David_A_C_Bongiorno, where you can see David doing his Instagram reels. That's what they
I
call
got to Instagram too late, Sarah. So David Bongiorno was already taken. So it's
Oh, that's unfortunate.
bit of a
My email
mouthful
as well. You saw I had to put the number 1. Someone beat me by 1 letter.
Annoying. Well,
Yes.
there we go. What a story. Serbia to Zimbabwe to New Zealand to Australia. And what did you do, David? And now about to become an icon in the law.
Wow,
Fantastic.
Do you know when we'll have you on next? We'll have you on next when you become an Australian citizen.
Oh, that would be awesome. So ultimately, as a 444, for whoever doesn't know, I'm just going to be earning over 54.5 for 5 years in a row, or 54.9, I think it was. Sorry,
54.9.
And then I can apply for my PR through there, and it'll all be smooth sailing. So we are 2 years down, 3 to go.
Beautiful. Looking forward to it.
Yes,
I will be up to
thank you.
episode 690 by then, David. That'd be
Perfect.
fantastic.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure.
well, David, happy lockdown.
Happy lockdown to you, Grant. Sarah, you're getting a lighter lockdown, but it's still a lockdown.
Well, we've just got to do the masks.
Oh, that's not bad.
They're
Oh,
out.
you're out.
Yeah.
They're out.
Grant and I've got another
Queensland are
week.
free. Queensland are free.
Queenslanders always do the right thing, and I'm so glad I migrated up. I've never been happier since COVID happened.
I think it's funny that you haven't been in lockdown very long, Sarah,
No.
and you couldn't remember if it was 2020 or 2019.
When it all started, I know.
I don't know which way to walk when I go out the front door to go to the shops. I can't remember if it's left or right. It's been so long.
Terribly, yeah. Nice. Well,
Thanks,
all the
everyone.
best.
Thanks,
All right.
David.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for listening.